I stood there, in the huge foyer of Gloria's Connecticut estate, the kind of place that shouted money and perfection. Beautiful wood floors, chandeliers that gleamed like they were taunting me. For 5 years I'd been attempting to fit into Clara's family, my wife's family. But it was like trying to squeeze into a suit 2 sizes too small. Her mother, Gloria, was the queen bee. Constantly dressed in something expensive, her voice sharp enough to chop glass. Then there were her sisters, Paige and Felicity, each just as gorgeous, just as fast with a jab or a joke that left me out in the cold. From the day Clara and I said I do, they treated me like I was part of the furniture, there but not worth mentioning. Family vacations? They arranged them without even a whisper my way. Inside jokes, I was always the one left staring, pretending I didn't care. I'd grin through it, swallow the sting, all for Clara. She'd just shrug it off, her quiet voice saying, "It's how they are." Like that was meant to make it acceptable. I'd nod, let it slide, since I loved her, because I wanted her to be happy. However, this Thanksgiving, something in me shifted. I wasn't just the silent guy in the corner anymore. I walked in that front door with my head up, my boots heavy on the floor, and a sealed envelope placed inside my coat pocket. It wasn't much to look at, just a simple white object, no markings on it. Yet it felt like a brick in my palm. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew it was time to stop smiling and start standing. The air smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon. The conversation of the relatives filled. The space, loud and dazzling. Gloria was already clutching Court in the dining room, her laugh booming out like she owned the world. Paige and Felicity were right there with her, tossing their hair, chattering over each other. Clara gripped my arm as we walked in, her grin warm but preoccupied, like she was already halfway into their orbit. I hung back, watching them. Feeling. The familiar twist in my belly, 5 years of this, 5 years of being the guy they didn't see. I'd tried everything to win them over. I'd fixed Gloria's car once, spent hours under the hood while she sipped champagne and didn't say thanks. I'd listened to Paige rant about her job, nodding like I cared about her office issues. I'd even helped Felicity move into her apartment, hauling things up 3 flights of stairs while she whined about the heat. None of it mattered to them. I was Clara's shadow. Nothing more. But that envelope in my pocket? That was my route out of the shadows. I didn't know if I'd use it today, tomorrow, or next week. But it was there, waiting. The dining room was a whirl of motion, plates clinking, wine pouring, the grandkids running around with their sticky hands. I took my regular position, at the end of the table, the one nobody cared about. And I watched them all. Gloria's voice pierced through the noise, talking about some new client she'd landed for her catering business. Paige jumped in with a story about her latest promotion, and Felicity? She was showing them images of a condo she'd just bought. Clara laughed along, her eyes bright, and I felt that familiar pain again. I wanted to belong here, with her, with them. Yet I didn't. Not yet. The meal went on, and I sat silent, nibbling at the stuffing, letting their voices wash over me. Every now and then, Clara would glance my way, her smile delicate, like she was confirming I was still there. I'd nod back, keeping my face serene, but inside, I was mulling over the envelope in my head. What was I waiting for? Why was I still sitting here, taking it? The answer hit me as Gloria clapped her hands to signify dessert. I'd been waiting for the ideal moment, and maybe, just maybe, that moment was arriving tonight. I reached inside my pocket, my fingertips caressing the paper, and took a slow breath. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. Pumpkin pie, and I'd pushed her off the throne. I didn't feel good about it, not precisely, but I didn't feel awful either. 5 years of being nothing to them, and now they'd never forget me. I stood there in Gloria's dining room, the mayhem swirling around me like a storm I'd whipped up, and it felt strange. Part of me wanted to step back. Part of me wanted to watch it burn. The table was a wreck now, papers scattered, wine glasses tipped over from Paige's pacing. The air smelled like spilled Merlot and betrayal. Gloria was still trying to hold it together, her voice harsh as she waved her hands at her family. But the gaps were too big to patch. Walter sat heavily in his chair, the documents I'd given her clasped in his hands, his expression a mix of hurt and wrath. Paige and Felicity were tag-teaming her now, their voices loud and overlapping, flinging accusations like fists. "How could you lie to us like that?" Paige snapped, her arms crossed tight. Felicity's eyes were red, her voice crumbling. "You watched me struggle, Mom, and you didn't care." Gloria whirled on them, her hair wild, her cheeks heated. "Don't appear holier than thou," she shouted. "You liked the gifts, the trips, the lovely things. I did this for all of you." That set them off again, and the room evolved into a yelling match, everyone talking over each other. I sat quiet, leaning against the wall, letting it play out. Then Clara's voice pierced through, harsh and tight. "Did you do this to degrade her?" she said, moving near me, her eyes fixed on mine. I turned to her, amazed she was even talking to me after everything. Her face was stiff, her fists clenched at her sides, and I could see she was upset, mad at me, not just her mom. "Okay," I responded, keeping my voice cool, steady. "I did it because the truth deserves daylight." She shook her head rapidly, like she didn't believe me. "This was low," she muttered, her words hitting me harder than I thought. My Clara, my wife, siding with Gloria even now. It stung, deep, but I didn't let it show. "What your mom did was low," I said, gesturing at the papers. "I just switched on the light." She opened her mouth to dispute, but Paige cut in, her voice roaring. "No, what Mom did was low." "How long has this been going on, How many years have you been robbing from us?" Gloria whirled toward her, frantic. "I wasn't stealing, I was managing, keeping us afloat. You don't know what it takes." But nobody was on her side anymore. Walter looked up, his eyes exhausted, and shook his head. "You managed us into nothing, Gloria," he said, his voice flat. That shut her up for a second, and I saw it. The fight drain out of her just a little. Felicity wiped her face, furious at her mom. "You always made it about you, your company, your image. We trusted you." The grandkids had slipped out at some point, perhaps scared off by the ranting. I didn't blame them. This wasn't a family anymore. It was a battleground. Gloria tried one more time, her voice quieter, practically pleading. "I gave you all so much. Don't you realize that? I made mistakes, but that was for us." Walter snorted, a bitter sound. "For us?" he said, holding up a paper. "You took my retirement, the girls' futures. How's that for us? That's..." When it broke. Whatever was left of their loyalty, it snapped. Paige moved away, shaking her head, and Felicity simply gazed at the floor, tears dripping. Clara stayed beside me, but she wasn't with me. Not really. Her eyes were on her mom, like she wanted to mend it, like she couldn't let go of that ancient bond. And I felt it then, the breach between us, greater than I'd realized. Gloria slumped back into her chair, her hands covering her face, and for a second, I thought it was finished. But then, Walter grasped his chest, a harsh grunt escaping him, and everything stopped. His face turned pale, his breath ragged, and he fell forward, the papers tumbling from his hands. Felicity yelled, a high, terrified sound, as Paige reached for her phone, screaming, "Call 911!" Clara dropped to her knees beside him, her hands on his arm, whispering, "Dad, hold on!" "Hold on!" I went forward, pulling out my own phone, my voice crisp as I spoke to the dispatcher. Address, symptoms, anything I could think of. Gloria just stood there sobbing, loud and theatrical, hanging behind everyone like she was in a play. But I saw it. She didn't touch him, didn't help. The room turned to turmoil, and I stood still, waiting for the sirens, knowing this was just the start of the disaster I'd found.